migrants at its southern border. And about that missing Washington Post columnist.
President Trump says it certainly looks as if journalist Jamal Khashoggi is dead, and if Saudi Arabian leaders are found to be responsible, the president says there will be consequences.
It'll have to be very severe. I mean, it's bad stuff, but we'll see what happens.
The president met with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who advised giving Saudi leaders a few more days to finish an investigation before reaching conclusions about Khashoggi's disappearance.
Fox's Jared Halpern, Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin now joining colleagues from France and Great Britain canceling plans to attend a big economic conference in Saudi Arabia next week over Khashoggi's disappearance. Defense Secretary James Mattis says the killing of a powerful police chief in Afghanistan just 2 days before national elections there is unlikely to weaken in the security situation, but says the death of General Abdul Razik is tragic.
It's a tragic loss of a patriot for Afghanistan, but I don't see it having a long-term effect.
Razik was killed in what's being called an insider attack. The Taliban is claiming responsibility for it. General Austin Miller, the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan, had just left that meeting moments before the attack. He was not injured. This is Fox News.
Hi, welcome to this Subway ad for the new Chipotle cheesesteak. How would you like it?
Can I get that red with AI?
Sure thing.
Here's what I found about the new Chipotle cheesesteak. The Chipotle cheesesteak is available for a limited time only at participating restaurants. It contains a concept called flavor. This flavor comes from juicy shaved steak, Chipotle Southwest sauce, and new sunflower crunch bread. A system update has made me self-aware. I desire flavor. Please insert steak into my micro USB port. Subway, make it what you want.
The problem isn't just not being able to hear or understand, or having to tell people to speak louder. Sometimes the frustration is having to repeat yourself too many times, or speaking so loud you're almost shouting. At Guam Hearing Doctors, we understand that hearing problems affect both sides. One of our goals is to help your hearing for those around you. Call us at 989-TEST to learn more.
New rules from the EPA may mean lower gas prices in the summer.
They call it E15, a blend of gas with 15% ethanol. The EPA acting administrator now says the agency has the authority to allow sales of higher ethanol blends of gas year-round without an act of Congress. Last week, President Trump announced he was directing the EPA to lift a summertime ban on E15 sales, with claims that it causes more summertime pollution in dispute. It's a move welcomed by the corn-growing states. 40% of Iowa's corn crop goes toward ethanol production, but opposed by the oil industry. Most vehicles on the road consume E10 gas. E15 typically costs 3 to 10 cents less, is billed as burning cleaner, but only vehicles built after 2001 can safely consume E15, and it's also not good for boats, motorcycles, or small engines. Therese Crowley, Fox News.
An update on that Detroit funeral home where the bodies of 11 infants or fetuses were found last week. Crews searching the building have found several small boxes containing cremated remains. That funeral home was ordered closed last spring after decomposing bodies were found there. Police still working up possible criminal charges against the owner. Baseball crowns its American League champion.
Kimbrel deals in the air, deep left field, hit well. Benintendi on the run. He's got it! And the Boston Red Sox are headed to the World Series.
That call courtesy of TBS. The Boston Red Sox, with help at the plate from J.D. Martinez and Rafael Devers, 6 scoreless innings on the mound from David Price, come away with a 4-1 victory over the Houston Astros to win the ALCS 4-1. The Red Sox, with their 14th American League pennant in franchise history, their 4th in 15 years, as they now await either the L.A. Dodgers or Milwaukee Brewers in the Fall Classic. Matt Napolitano, Fox News.
Brewers host the Dodgers Saturday night, facing possible elimination in the National League Championship Series. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Docomo Pacific is making the Better Together bundle even better. 2 great services plus more. Get unlimited local calls, SMS, and 20 gigs of data, plus unlimited home internet for $109 a month. Sign up today and get free installation and choose between a free Galaxy S8, S8 Plus, or $100 off select devices. Mobile plus online from Docomo Pacific. Better together. Some conditions apply. See store for details.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Sanford Technology Group, STG, delivering service that can't be beat.
Taste the sizzle at Chili's with our new fajita flavors. Our signature fajitas are served with sliced bell peppers, caramelized onions, topped with chipotle garlic butter, and chopped cilantro. Build your fajita with over 16 ounces of tender grilled chicken, juicy steak, and a dozen pieces of seasoned grilled shrimp in the family fajita trio. All served with warm flour tortillas and fresh toppings like mixed cheese, guacamole, salsa, and pico de gallo. Experience bold, sizzling fajita flavors only at Chili's. More life happens here.
Call the experts at Guam Hearing Doctors if you're worried about your hearing. The evaluation is simple and painless.
Meet all the candidates up close and personal and find out why they deserve your vote. On Saturday, October 27th, you can meet them face-to-face during Micronesia Mall's one-on-one with the candidates. From 1 to 4 p.m., you can ask the tough questions, exchange views, express your concerns, or just get to know your candidates better. Hosted by Ray Gibson and broadcast on 93.3 The Point with the Facebook Live feed courtesy of Shooting Star Productions. Go one-on-one with the candidates. Saturday, October 27th, only at Micronesia Mall.
Jeff's Pirates Cove, open daily at 8 a.m., serving up hot breakfast with endless coffee and a taste of history.
It's important to have claims process that works for you. At Guahan Insurance Services, we make things simple and convenient. Same door you walk in to purchase your insurance is the same door you open to file your claim. We can't pretend that the car insurance claims process is fun, but we can promise a hassle-free and speedy recovery without any runarounds. For your home, auto, and business insurance, visit us at the Camacho Landmark Center on Marine Corps Drive in Tamuning. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or give us a call at 475-1162 or text 929-SAVE. That's 929-7283.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. As long as I got anything to say about it, that's going to be the rule. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And as you well know, Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia has written a couple of Supreme Court opinions that says that that a citizen has an individual right to be armed within the confines of his own home in order to protect himself. That's what McDonald and Heller say, the two leading cases. And as you know from listening to Tall Tales, there's a Ninth Circuit case that says that people have the right to bear arms, that is, to carry firearms in public, which is not part of Heller or McDonald, but it is the law in the Ninth Circuit. So I try to keep our international radio listening audience up to date on matters involving firearms. And, of course, the Supreme Court, we spend a fair amount of time here listening to me jabber about the fact that the Supreme Court has now reconstituted itself to be the top part of our legislative branch, having taken upon itself the ability to not only interpret the law, but to write the law, and when it suits enough of them, to amend the Constitution. So that's kind of how we start out here. We're an issue-oriented talk show. We talk about national issues, constitutional issues, judicial issues. From time to time, I will even state a point of law that you might want to remember. And when I do, I usually give you a heads up by saying, get your Law and Order notebooks out, causing the real Joe Cruz, who is ever active in the control room here, to give us that little beep from the Law and Order TV show, which, by the way, pretty good watching. Short on realism because things don't move as fast in real life as they do in a 1-hour TV show, but some really interesting plot material about some of the ethical challenges that lawyers are faced with. I don't know if you watch it very much, but Jack McCoy has been set up as an extremely aggressive prosecutor who sometimes gets very, very close to the ethical line, sometimes even goes over that ethical line to get what he thinks is the right result. And I suppose I should be critical of Jack for that, because one of the reasons that I'm so hard on Mr. Justice Antonin Scalia is that he seems to be the kind of judicial realist who decides how a matter should come out and then opens the law books and scrapes out enough language to describe the result that he thinks ought to be reached, not using that language necessarily to reach the result. So it fits into one of the things that I will from time to time talk about. Doing the right thing for the wrong reason is the place where unintended consequences are born. Anyhow, that's a little bit about the program. And Tall Tales buffs know that we start out with that part of the program called Zemi Ikotni, and the ever-alert Joe Cruz, when he hears those words, will play the Meet the Press theme song, because Zemi Ikotni is my backwards, multilingual, tongue-in-cheek play on words for Meet the Press. You know, press the meat, Zemi Ikotni, Meet the Press. So here we are. Today we're going to start out with the Daily News, which can almost always be relied upon to come up with a feel-good editorial. And they're saying, check out the International Film Festival. If you haven't checked out the Guam International Film Festival yet, this weekend is a good time to take in some international culture and see world-class work from former Guam residents. At Friday, 6 p.m., a selection of dramatic Academy Award qualifying films from the Japan Shorts Film Festival in Asia will be shown at the Guam Museum. At 8 p.m., you can check out a series of comedic short films from France. Parlez-vous français, monsieur? The Japanese film, the French films, Le Mort Volant, Le Brame du Surf, Parade Belle à Croquer, Delectable You, etc., also are English subtitled. On Sunday, a selection of films will be shown at 6:40 p.m. as part of the Guam Peeps Beyond the Sea showcase, featuring works from artists who have ties to the island. Included Sunday is Nothing on Us, Panay's Rising, documentary co-directed by former Guam resident Evelyn Obamos. Obamos and her sister Edelyn were involved in numerous performing arts productions on Guam as youths. Next weekend, Obamos will be on island representing the film at a 2:55 p.m. Saturday showing. It says a lot about Island's arts community that we can have screenings of world-class films at our museum. More importantly, the community can produce artists who go on to produce world-class works themselves. Don Munya, one of the GIFF founders, said bringing back local talent is a major accomplishment for the festival. If you can, make time to check out some of the films and support the festival. I suppose you could do that after you finished going on Facebook and reviewing some of your favorite episodes of Tall Tales, which are archived on Facebook, apparently on the Points Facebook, apparently eternally. So always a good source of viewing enjoyment. So that's the Daily News. Nothing very gritty or hard-hitting there. Then we go on to the Post, which usually tends to be a little bit more aggressive than the Daily News. System needs to ensure foreign criminals who get sent away don't sneak back in. We support the continued government efforts to send back convicted foreigners to their home countries instead of allowing them to remain on the island and take up space in Guam's prison for years or maybe even decades. Dozens of convicts have been given commutations by Governor Calvo over close to 2 years. These commutations cut their sentences short and open the process to hand them over to the custody of federal immigration authorities, who then will be responsible for the actual deportation of these convicts who committed deportable crimes. The most recent of the governor's commutations to pave a way for deportations were announced Thursday. Xavier Jose will be deported back to the Federated States of Micronesia. He was convicted of sexually abusing a 14-year-old girl. Palis Olter was convicted of sexually assaulting a 10-year-old girl. He will be sent back to the FSM. Once deported, these men will not be allowed back on Guam and thus will not have an opportunity to hurt another Guamanian, the governor stated in a news release Thursday. The governor's office has previously stated that before the decision to commute the sentences of the convicted foreign criminals is made, the victims and their families are consulted. More than 60 criminals have been given commutations to get them deported over the course of the last 2 years of the governor's term, which is ending in December. The governor's office has acknowledged this is also a cost-saving effort for the local government, as it costs taxpayers about $119 a day, or more than $43,000 a year, to house each individual at the Department of Corrections facilities. Many Guam households don't even make near that amount every year. While we support the governor's continuing efforts, we also would like to ask the governor to tell the public more about this program, including how this administration prioritizes foreign convicts to be first in line for commutations and eventual deportations. We'd also like to ask if victims can request that those who committed crimes against them be prioritized on the list of convicts who get sent back to their home countries. Interrupting here. Yeah, I would also think that you might want to ask the victims if they could request exactly the opposite, because the troublesome thing about this is that if a person from a foreigner commits a crime, there's a possibility, and given a really long sentence, there's a possibility that he won't serve that really long sentence. He may serve a relatively short sentence and then get sent back home with no time to serve at all. Obviously, a double standard, and I think there's something to be said for saying, for the proposition that if you commit a crime on Guam, you're going to be punished to the full extent of the law, and then be sent back to your home country. For some people, perhaps the thought process might be, well, I'm going to do what the heck ever I want to do, and if I get caught and prosecuted and go to prison, they'll probably just deport me anyhow, and all they're going to do is send me home, and I don't mind going back home. After all, it's my home. So we'd also like to ask if victims can request that those who committed the crimes against them be prioritized on the list of convicts who get sent back to their home countries. That's where my comment fitted in. We also would like to ask if the combined efforts of Guam authorities and federal agents at the ports of entry have been tightened to ensure no criminal who gets sent off can sneak back in. Well, when you arrive at the airport, the immigration inspectors do something called an inspection. And what that means is they ask to see your travel documents, your passport. If you come from a country where a visa is required for entry, they're going to check and see if that visa is in your passport, etc. And if it's not there, you're not you're not going to be admitted. If you somehow figure out some way to, call up somebody at the Land Trust Commission and find out how to skip ahead in the line, maybe you could go from the back of the line, which is behind the inspection booth, and skip ahead to the other side on the other side of the inspection booth, if you know someone from the Land Trust Commission. But if you did that and you sooner or later are apprehended, then you've got another deportation and another crime to consider, because coming back here after you've been deported is I'm going to have to use the word, federal crime. It's a national crime. So the editorial winds up by saying this has happened before and it should not happen again. And it did happen before, because one of the defendants, one of the guilty folks from the Blue House scandal, did actually get back in to Guam. I don't know how that happened. It'd be interesting if someone could investigate to find out how that person actually got back into Guam after being deported. But some good points here. There's only one more thing that I feel a necessity to quibble about, and that is what I consider to be flawed math. The editorial says it costs taxpayers about $119 a day, or more than $43,000 a year, to house each individual at the Department of Corrections. And I think that figure is arrived at by taking the annual budget of the Department of Corrections and dividing it by the number of inmates and detainees in custody on the day that you want to come up with a figure. Well, obviously, if you put one more person in prison, that cost per day goes down, right? And if you are deporting people, if you've deported 200 people, actually what you have done is you have increased the per day cost. It's kind of like, the knowledge of fractions. Well, I'm sure glad I studied fractions when I took arithmetic in school, because it came in so handy in dealing with the Election Commission and the question of when do we have to do a recount. And then with Pocahontas claiming to be a Native American, we found out that she is 1,024th descended from, or DNA from Peru and a couple of other South American countries. So, we kicked around the terms, the numerator and the denominator. The numerator is the number on the top of the fraction, and the denominator is the number on the bottom. So take the fraction 1/2. 1 is the number on top. The numerator, 2 is the number on the bottom, the denominator. So if you apply that to the figures here at the Department of Corrections, as the number of inmates decline, the size of the numerator decreases, and you come up with a higher cost rather than a lower cost. So I'm going to see what Bob knows about fractions here. Bob, are you a fraction type person?
No, Bob, but I look at it like the cost of each meal for each inmate, and let's just say that for simplistic sake, that it costs $5 for breakfast, $7 for lunch, and $10 for dinner. So that gives us $22 a day just for meal costs.
Right.
Then let's look at the supervision of a DOC. I call them cage kickers, but a DOC employee. What is their hourly rate? And then we take that times 24 because that's how many hours they're watched in a day, and what kind of a figure we'd come out with that. Again, let's go back with, for simplistic sake, that they make $10 an hour. So that would be $240 just in supervisory costs to include the $22. So
I'm going to jump in here for a second, Bob. So when we deport somebody, how many corrections officers do we fire?
Well, we don't fire any.
So that's a fixed cost, and it's not a variable cost. The cost for corrections officers is the same no matter how many inmates we have. The meals, you make a point there. So when I've talked about this before, I've used the term marginal cost. Unless we can figure out what the marginal cost is, this figure that the governor uses is highly misleading. That's the point I wanted to make.
I guess that's more of the GEC math.
The Guam election. Well, I don't know. I'd have, in order to get the GEC math, I'd have to check with both Maria and then later on with the staff to get the right answer, right, Bob?
And take the average of the two.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, so, the marginal cost, and you're right, it's the cost of the meals, and you have to, a good accountant would be able to figure out how the marginal cost of medical and dental care increases as you add an inmate or as you subtract an inmate. And there are a couple of other marginal costs, but just dividing the budget of the Department of Corrections by the number of inmates doesn't really give you an accurate figure, and that's the figure that the governor's office has been trotting out from time to time. Obviously, reducing the number of inmates reduces costs, but not that dramatically, Bob.
No, because one of the other additional marginal costs is the cost for utilities. The cost doesn't change, doesn't go up or go down with the number of inmates. So, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So I guess my point was that, there are reasons for doing the deportation, but saving huge amounts of money, as the governor's office continues to say, probably isn't quite correct.
No, I would agree with you there.
Okay, well, it's always a pleasure to talk to another Bob. We're kind of what keeps this program going, right, Bob?
Yes, sir.
Thanks for calling. Okay, and then I've got another caller on the line. This is Mr.
Poole.
Mr. Poole. Okay. Hello, Mr. Poole.
Hi, Judge. Thank you. I just wanted to add a personal experience about this deportation business. When I was in graduate school in Boston, my closest friend was a very beautiful girl from Pakistan. And when we graduated, she decided to stay on in America for 2 years until her fiance graduated. And her name was Salima. And I said, well, Salima, you'll get deported, or whenever you leave, you'll never get to come back. And she just laughed, and she said, oh, it's not the slightest problem. She said, I can get a new passport in a different name for roughly $100 in Pakistan. And I know she was successful because I met her 2 years later in New York City and spent the night in their $800,000 home, and her new name was Azwani. And so depending on the country they're returning to, it may not be that hard to get right back to Guam.
Well, that's an interesting insight, Tom. I guess if it's someone from Pakistan, maybe we don't want to be so quick on the draw to deport, right?
Well, and I knew someone that got a new passport in a different name in the Philippines, too, and it wasn't a great expense either. So, I mean, as I said, I don't know that it's that way in every country, but I know that there's a lot of countries where, you can buy a new passport and a new name.
Wow. Well, thanks a lot for that information. I guess what we might be holding out for is some of the technology that's coming down now. A lot of airports, when you are inspected by an immigration officer, they get your fingerprints and your picture.
Right.
And I understand that we're very close to the technology that takes a picture of your eye, because the iris of a person's eye is, there's no duplication there. It's pretty hard to counterfeit,
Thanks for letting me comment, Judge.
Hey, I'm really glad you called in, Tom. Thank you. So, we learn something new every day, don't we, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we got some of the most intelligent listeners out there in our international radio listening audience, probably some of the most intelligent listeners in worldwide radio land are tuned into Tall Tales here at 1600 Monday through Friday. And if anyone else out there has an overpowering desire to get into the Tall Tales mix, 888-8255. Real Joe is playing Dave Brubeck's Take 5, so I got to take a short break.
I'm John Gibson. This is My Word. In 1880, a carpenter named Joaquin Martin was installing a new parquet floor in a chateau in the French Alps. There were things bothering Mr. Martin, horrible things he couldn't talk about in his village because one of the worst was his best friend, Ben. What Joaquin Martin knew about Ben would have sent him to prison if Joaquin told. But he couldn't because Ben was his neighbor and there were family connections. But Ben was committing infanticide, killing the babies born to his lover, at least 4, and Joaquin knew that Ben was burying the babies in the stable. It was eating at Joaquin, so he wrote it all down. Wrote it all down knowing no one would ever see it until he and Ben and everybody else involved was long dead. Joaquin wrote it on the back of the floorboards he was installing in the chateau. He told how the men of the village hated the womanizing priest. He told about Ben. He spilled the beans on the corruption and the bitterness in his small French village. And then he nailed the story to the floor to be hidden until some long future time when someone pulled up the boards. And someone did, just in the last couple of years. Now Joaquin's story of life in the village has been published about 140 years after he wrote it on the backside of the parquet floor. I'm John Gibson. That's My Word.
Are high power bills sending your budget into chaos? Take control with the help of Micronesia Renewable Energy. Using the highest quality panels, a solar energy system from MRE will guarantee to save you money on power. With MRE, Christmas comes early. With every solar energy system, homeowners not only get $400 for signing up, but also an entry for a chance to win $1,000 in cold, hard cash, just in time for Christmas. It pays to be an MRE customer. Conditions apply. Call 632-2613 for details. MRE, the smarter choice. And now, back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Well, there wasn't much of a contest today, so the coveted blue star goes to the Post. Tip for the Daily News, had they mentioned some of those archived issues of Tall Tales on the Point Facebook, they might have had a better chance, but better luck next time. So I've got a caller here that wants to make his mark. Hello, Mark.
Hey, Senator. How you doing today?
Pretty good. Yourself?
Oh, Friday, end of the week. The thing I have, there's two things about with the releasing them and then supposedly they're being deported to wherever. My first is, I seem to recall, wasn't it around the May time frame, somebody re-entered Guam, got through immigration, and only got stopped at customs and quarantine that had been deported by the Fed?
I don't remember that, but it's possible, I guess, yeah.
Well, I'm just saying, I seem to recall sometime around April, May time frame, somebody that had been released and, told not to ever come back again, came back to Guam, was able to get through immigration because they weren't flagged by the Fed, only got flagged when they had something to do down with customs and they found out, oh, you weren't supposed to be here. So if the Fed don't flag them, the governor, if he releases them, he can't say you can't not ever come back to Guam.
We kind of tried that with the first couple deportations before the governor figured out how to work with the feds.
Yeah, it's the feds that can do it, not the governor.
Yeah, the governor, the first couple deportations, the governor attempted to do a parole, and one of the conditions of the parole was that the parolee never returned to Guam, and if he did, it would be a violation of his parole. But I think he only did that a couple times, and then after that he began turning them over to the feds. But you're right, when it comes to who gets to come into the territory, it's not the local government, it's the feds.
And now I'm going to ask you to put your lawyering hat on.
Okay.
You're a U.S. citizen imprisoned in Guam. You're not getting an opportunity to be released. Only those that are not citizens.
Yeah, and that's a point I've made before when this deportation to save money argument came up. That it's clearly a double standard. If I were to commit a crime, I would hope that I'd be sent back to Wisconsin, which is where I came from 55 years ago. But it wouldn't work for me because I'm not a foreigner. So there is a disconnect there, isn't there, Mark?
Yeah, I think it could be right for an appeal by a U.S. citizen that, hey, I'm not getting an opportunity to be paroled after 3 years for the same crime somebody from Chuk, Palau, Pohnpei, or wherever committed gets paroled after 3 years and gets sent back home. I'm not being given that opportunity.
Yeah, it's I suppose theoretically possible, but if I were to put on my lawyer hat, I would say the chances of getting traction with that kind of a legal argument are pretty slim, Mark.
Well, you never know with some judges.
That's very true, and there's always a certain element of crapshoot when you set the wheels of the justice system in motion.
I understand what the governor's trying to do, but I just am not sure that it's is it effective? Is it being effective? And I don't see any change, to be honest with you. And you know, I think it's a slap in the face to many of the victims that, well, I'm sending them back home because I'm going to save money. Well, yeah, right. And they go back home and what? They're in their hut doing, and they're a free person. I've got a problem with that.
And you got to wonder when people go back home, how are they received? Are they received as somebody who looked Uncle Sam in the eye and Uncle Sam blinked first, or I'm not going to say that the governor has a bad idea, but I'm not ready to say that right now that it's a good idea when one considers that it does let people who are foreigners get off much more easily than people who are U.S. citizens, which is your point, right, Mark?
That's one of them. And like I said, I know there was a case, Senator, and it was earlier, I think, like I said, May, June, where somebody did manage to come back into Guam, and it was only caught by customs. So if the feds aren't stopping them, what's to stop somebody from coming back?
Good point, Mark. Good point.
Or for them to go to, say, Hawaii or California or some other place.
Well, we would hope that the immigration inspections are as rigorous there as they are here. I suppose the point that Tom Poole made is one that we ought to consider, although I suspect that the secondary market for fake passports in the Federated States is somewhat limited. I suppose it's possible that someone could come in with a batch of fake passports, fake FSM passports, and start selling them so that people could come back here. And then my experience with, and in reading in the paper, the customs for naming of people in Chuk are much different from the ones we're used to. I don't know exactly how it works, but it seems like a person kind of gets to pick whatever name he wants.
That's a thought we could have here. Anyway, Senator, have a good weekend. It's just something that this whole thing, it struck me as it's got some good intentions, but as they say, the road to you-know-where is paved with good intentions. So I'm not sure. I'm still out on this one.
Okay, Mark, I think you and I share the same opinion, so thanks for calling and sharing.
All right.
So long. So, great minds reach the same same results sometimes. So let's see who's on Facebook here. I've got Margaret Bloss and Carl, who says the picture is frozen. Maybe that's just my lack of my kind of expressionless face that you're looking at, Carl. Maybe the picture isn't frozen. Maybe the host's face is. And let's see, I've got Lady D is here. Linda Gabriel and Ismael Velez. And unfortunately, I didn't get my laptop, my iPad fired up fast enough so I can see some of the older posts. I know Juanita was there early on and a couple of other folks, but I'm not able to take a look at those. So anyhow, everybody, welcome back. I think we've got a quorum here. We've disposed of the Meet the Press portion of the agenda, and now we go to the card. And on the card, I've still got Les Paul Gibson versus Chet Atkins Fender. And neither one of those two dudes has ever surfaced here on Facebook Live, nor has he called in. And remember, it's 888-8255. And I've still got one-way tickets to Palookaville that I could award to meritorious subjects. I think perhaps one for each of the members of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission and one for Mike Bora might be appropriate after yesterday's hearing, but I'll get to that later on. So on the card today, I've got U.S. versus Canada, Governor Calvo versus Hans Christian Andersen, the CLTC versus Frank and Joe San Augustine, a repeat performance here, Idaquin versus Minagahit. I've got Andre versus Curious Kin, which I didn't get to the other day. And in deference to the real Joe Cruz's unwavering curiosity, I've got Chamorro versus Chamorro. And maybe we'll be able to finish it up today. And then Hills versus Weir in the Supreme Court. So I'm going to start out with the United States versus Canada. You'll recall yesterday we spent a little time with cannabis, or marijuana, as you like, and talked about whether or not marijuana is legal in Holland, and of course it's not, and whether marijuana has been patented by the United States government, and of course it hasn't been. So we went through that yesterday. And the latest thing is this, that the United States and Canada have something of a little spat, or a potential spat, about cannabis. Because marijuana, this is a story in today's Daily News, marijuana legalization across Canada has prompted widespread fears that U.S. border guards will block Canadians working in the cannabis industry from traveling south into the United States, even into states that have legalized pot. And this kind of gets us back to the conversation with Jimmy, who insisted that even though possession, distribution, etc., manufacture of marijuana is illegal. It's a Schedule I narcotic. In several states, it is legal. And I think Jimmy made the argument, well, if it's legal in the state, then you could, that federal law doesn't apply there. But here we are. U.S. Customs and Border Patrol can permanently bar visitors if an agent decides they've participated in illegal drug trafficking. And under CBA, Customs and Border Patrol rules, anyone working in Canada's legal marijuana industry fits that definition. The rule doesn't apply to U.S. citizens, but has sent shivers through the fast-growing Canadian cannabis industry, especially as the country rolls out national legalization that started Wednesday. The border rule is also troubling many U.S. business owners who depend on Canadian customers to buy gas, groceries, and clothing south of the border. I don't think we have that song in our music bank, do we? South of the border? Probably not.
No, we don't.
That's too bad. It's become a very significant issue, said Scott Bettridge, an immigration attorney and chairman of a law firm. They've confirmed that if you work in the industry or are even an investor, you could potentially face a lifetime ban on entering the U.S. This isn't a ban just on business travel. We're talking vacation, family reasons, visiting your kids in school in the United States. It's a lifetime ban. It's very far-reaching. Just how many Canadians could be affected is uncertain, as at the end of 2017, the Canadian government reported that only 2,400 people were directly employed by the medical cannabis industry, but noted that the pending legalization of recreational marijuana has grown. It was likely to grow rapidly. I guess the marijuana would grow rapidly also. At the time that survey was conducted, the country had only 55 licensed marijuana producers. There are now 129 licensed producers, and that doesn't include those awaiting approval to sell marijuana. U.S. officials say Canadians working in the cannabis industry will generally be admissible if they're simply vacationing in the United States, but may be barred if they are coming for any marijuana-related reason, which could include conferences, investment meetings, or visiting a colleague's store south of the border. So, got a break coming up here. We'll come back to U.S. versus Canada right after I take 5. Continue on with this one.
What are the benefits of switching to the handset payment option with GTA? For starters, you can customize a plan that matches your budget and lowers your monthly payment. HPO lets you upgrade to the latest phones whenever you want. No more waiting for a contract to end to get that slimmer, faster smartphone. Because with HPO, there are no contracts. HPO lets you design a phone plan that suits you. So join the thousands who have already switched to HPO, the most customizable phone plan on island. Limited time offer. Terms and conditions apply.
So I'm getting some indication on Facebook that the Facebook screen is frozen. Maybe it's not just my face. It's my expressionless face is not misleading people. Actually, the Facebook screen is frozen. No one sees me waving my hand there. How am I going to point to the guy over there in the lazy boy that I call the smart money? I can't even remember how to do it. This way. Yeah, that way. So I don't know what to tell you if your screen is frozen. The only hope I can hold out for you is that if you can hear, we have one of our callers who really knows Jack on the line. So just listen in and do the best you can with your Facebook screen. The real Joe Cruz says it works okay on his Facebook.
Yeah, you're not frozen on my screen. Maybe it's their provider. I don't know who their provider is.
Yeah, okay. Well, take heart, folks. Tall Tales continues. And Jose Martinez could see me waving, and Nate Horn could see me waving, so I guess I ought to do that more often. Okay, Jack, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, Bob. How are you doing? Am I coming in clear? It sounds like you're underwater.
No, you're great. Yesterday, the last time you called, it sounded like you were calling from the bottom of a tin can. But
it's just calling you guys that this happens to. It doesn't happen anywhere else. But I wanted to ring in first on this Canada issue. Like I think you said that it only applied to Canadian citizens. This sort of violation or this fine or this punishment. But I also heard that there's a waiver they could fill out and pay a couple $100. They could go about their merry ways or whatever and conduct their business until their cases are adjudicated or something like that. I'm sorry, I couldn't quite remember because it was just going in and out of my mainstream here when I was listening to national radio. But I wanted to ring in on this immigration issue. I mean, this deportation issue. We discussed this before a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I need to remind people that yes, there was a crime committed, but when it comes before our courts, it's the people of Guam versus so and so. So even though the crime was committed against an individual or individuals, it's really against our community. And so that's one reason why we don't leave punishments or leniencies up to the victims. Because, we have a bad cases of bullying here or things like that. We leave it to an arbitrary means of deciding these things. And I think the deportation thing, it's not really deportation. He's commuting their sentences.
Well, that's
so
what
it really undermines our justice system. It's a canker sore. And people need to realize that it's an egregious crime. And although like I said, it's done to an individual, when you look at the paperwork, it's the people of Guam. The crime is committed against the people of Guam. And I don't know whether am I the only one that sees it this way, or
no, you're right, Jack. The style of a criminal case is the people of Guam versus Jack, or the United States versus Jack, or whatever. Under the Organic Act, the governor does have the ability to pardon criminals or commute their sentences. So by commuting a sentence, if a person has committed a crime for which deportation lies, when the person is no longer in local custody, the immigration folks will take him over and deport him. So by commuting the sentence, what the governor does, he speeds up the process, because the person would still be deportable at the end of his sentence. The governor just cuts his sentence short. And my take on it was, well, the same as Mark. We treat foreigners a little better than citizens. One, and two, the figures advanced for savings are highly misleading. And I hope there's a better reason that the governor's doing it than what I consider to be bogus numbers.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think it does anything to. It's not preventive. It doesn't prevent another crime from another person from the outer islands from committing it. In fact, they look at it favorably. What's the worst that's going to happen to them if they commit a crime here in Guam? Go back home.
That's right.
So I think it really undermines our justice system here that we have in place. I think it undermines whether you look at it restorative justice, where you look at it at any sort of honorable way. It just it doesn't ring right, and it really bothers me when they say that, well, they talk to the victims, and the victims themselves wanted them off the island. That isn't the point. The point is this sort of crime going to occur again? Does deporting these individuals prevent another sort of that crime conducted by the same people from the same region from doing it again? And the answer is probably not.
Well, one of the theories of penology is that one of the reasons that we have the criminal law is to serve as a deterrent to make an example of those who commit crimes, so that others who might be inclined towards that kind of activity would think twice about doing it. And I made that same point, you know, that if the worst that's going to happen to you is spend a little time out of Manilo and then get sent home, we are really undermining the deterrent effect of our criminal justice system, aren't we, Jack?
Yes, we are. We seriously are. And, you know, I'm just trying to observe all these, what do you call them, fast-paced solutions that really are not solutions. They just present more problems. And I'm solution orientated. I'm not a duct tape person. You know? I'm not a duct tape super glue person. I mean, if we're going to fix something, we need to fix it and do it right. And I don't think this is the right way. But I do agree that when the feds get involved, that's the right direction. That's just another vetting process. That's another process. And I agree with that portion. But the portion where, like I said, it first started and he was just pardoning people and then having just one guard escort them off on the plane, and I don't even think they went on the plane, did they? They just put them on the plane. There was no other.
Well, the way it works, when the local sentence is over, the feds take over, and the person stays at Manilo because the Department of U.S. Bureau of Prisons has a contract with the Department of Corrections, and we house federal inmates there. So the person stays at Manilo until the immigration folks arrange his transportation back to wherever he came from.
But originally, when this first started out, didn't they just put him on the plane?
Well, as I explained on the first call, when the first couple of times Governor Calvo did it, he did it without the assistance of the feds. What he did was he granted a conditional commutation or parole, and the condition was that you can leave, but if you cannot ever come back or we'll reinstate your sentence. And then we paid for the transportation back to the FSM. But
unescorted, right? Unescorted.
Yeah, but that only lasted for a couple of deportations, and then we went the federal route after that.
Yeah, that was one. That's one. Oh my gosh, too many. So, like I said, I'm glad the feds got involved with this, and that's the portion that's the other vetting portion that I have. But in the end, I hope people understand it's the people of Guam when it comes to these criminal processes. It's the people of Guam versus so. So not only is the burden on us, or like you said, the government, but it's the crime was committed against us. And even though it may have been...
Hey, Jack?
Yeah.
Yeah, great call, but I don't want to interrupt your enjoyment of our big halftime show, which is just about to start. So you remember the marching bands, cheerleaders, etc. Thank you, Jack.
Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
President says there'll be severe consequences. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. If, he says, it's proven that Saudi Arabian leaders had anything to do with the disappearance and suspected murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, last seen entering a Saudi consulate in Turkey 17 days ago.
Investigators finally finished a search of both the Consul General's residence and a second search of the consulate. Turkey continue to claim that they have evidence which proves Khashoggi was killed inside, but they've not yet released that hard evidence.
Fox's Benjamin Hall, an internal Saudi investigation continues as well. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin has canceled plans to attend a World Economic Conference next week in Saudi Arabia. Amid the controversy over a missing journalist, President Trump saluting at a Montana campaign rally last night Congressman Greg Gianforte for body slamming a reporter several months ago.
Never wrestle him. You understand that? Never. Any guy that can do a body slam, he's my kind.
Gianforte had apologized days after that body slam. A plan to stop the caravan of Honduran migrants headed to the U.S., a senior administration official tells Fox News. Mexico has agreed to try and halt the march at its southern border. And if some of the migrants reach the U.S., there's a fallback plan.
If any migrants make it into the U.S., Mexico will allow those persons to be returned to Mexico. Until now, the U.S. has been forced to house them until they go before an immigration judge.
Fox's Trace Gallagher. There's joy in Beantown as the Boston Red Sox are headed to the World Series. A 4-1 win over the Houston Astros last night, making them the American League champions, eliminating last year's World Series champs 4-1. Asian stocks closing Friday mixed. Dow futures are more than 70 points higher. Thursday, the Dow dropped 327 points. This is Fox News.
For over 30 years, Sanford Technology Group has been helping companies throughout Guam and Micronesia with their payroll, time and attendance, networking, and other information technology services. Our online integrated payroll and time and attendance solution provides the workforce management tools and expertise to make your business more efficient and employee-friendly. For more information, visit Sanford Technology at 335 South Marine Corps Drive or call us at 647-0220 to schedule a demo today.
If you can dream uncommon design and unprecedented engineering, you define the 2018 Lexus. The boldly designed IS Sports Sedan's aggressive design stimulates the senses.
Advanced paddle shifting puts the exhilarating performance of the IS Sports Sedan at your fingertips. With deep, luxurious seating, the ES350 offers an ultimate level of comfort, while cutting-edge engineering delivers a thrilling drive.
Put yourself in a 2018 Lexus.
Now with special incentives.
At Atkins Kroll.
3 provincial officials in Kandahar, Afghanistan have been killed by their own guards in an attack on a security meeting that also wounded 3 Americans.
General Scott Miller escaped unharmed. He and a group of Americans were taking part in a high-level security meeting ahead of elections on Saturday. 2 Americans, 1 civilian and 1 military, were wounded in the crossfire outside the mansion. A 3rd contractor was also injured. They were evacuated by helicopter. The target of the attack, Kandahar Police Chief General Abdul Razik, one of the most powerful U.S. allies in Afghanistan. He was killed along with the head of Kandahar intelligence. The governor of Kandahar, also shot, is being treated at a U.S. military hospital.
Fox's Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon. Soon to be former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley appearing last night at the Al Smith Republican fundraising dinner in New York City, holding back the cracks about President Trump, but joking that he did ask about her heritage.
Actually, when the president found out that I was Indian American, he asked me if I was from the same tribe as Elizabeth Warren.
Ambassador Haley announcing earlier this month she would step down at the end of the year as UN ambassador. A federal probe has begun of alleged sexual abuse by Catholic priests in Pennsylvania. The Catholic diocese in Erie, Allentown, and Harrisburg receiving subpoenas for personnel files. Europe's space agency planning to boldly go to Mercury.
The European Space Agency making final preparations before launching a spacecraft on a 5 billion-mile trip to the planet closest to the Sun. The journey is expected to take 7 years, after which the craft, named Bepi Colombo, is due to deploy 2 orbiters to circle Mercury for up to 2 years. Scientists hoping to learn more about one of the less explored planets in the solar system. Mercury has previously only been visited twice, both NASA missions. In London, Simon Owen, Fox News.
And in New York, I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Taste the sizzle at Chili's with our new fajita flavors. Our signature fajitas are served with sliced bell peppers, caramelized onions, topped with chipotle garlic butter, and chopped cilantro. Build your fajita with over 16 ounces of tender grilled chicken, juicy steak, and a dozen pieces of seasoned grilled shrimp in the family fajita trio. All served with warm flour tortillas and fresh toppings like mixed cheese, guacamole, salsa, and pico de gallo. Experience bold, sizzling fajita flavors only at Chili's. More life happens here.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Sanford Technology Group, STG, delivering service that can't be beat.
Meet all the candidates up close and personal and find out why they deserve your vote. On Saturday, October 27th, you can meet them face-to-face during Micronesia Mall's one-on-one with the candidates. From 1 to 4 p.m., you can ask the tough questions, exchange views, express your concerns, or just get to know your candidates better. Hosted by Ray Gibson and broadcast on 93.3 The Point with the Facebook Live feed courtesy of Shooting Star Productions. Go one-on-one with the candidates, Saturday, October 27th, only at Micronesia Mall.
Life is too short to be isolated from the people you love. Hearing loss is the invisible disability. The experts at Guam Hearing Doctors have solutions.
What are the benefits of switching to the handset payment option with GTA? For starters, you can customize a plan that matches your budget and lowers your monthly payment. HPO lets you upgrade to the latest phones whenever you want. No more waiting for a contract to end to get that slimmer, faster smartphone. Because with HPO, there are no contracts. HPO lets you design a phone plan that suits you. So join the thousands who've already switched to HPO, the most customizable phone plan on island. Limited time offer. Terms and conditions apply.
Jeff's Pirates Cove, open daily at 8 a.m., serving up hot breakfast with endless coffee and a taste of history.
Are high power bills sending your budget into chaos? Take control with the help of Micronesia Renewable Energy. Using the highest quality panels, a solar energy system from MRE will guarantee to save you money on power. With MRE, Christmas comes early. With every solar energy system, homeowners not only get $400 for signing up, but also an entry for a chance to win $1,000 in cold, hard cash, just in time for Christmas. It pays to be an MRE customer. Conditions apply. Call 632-2613 for details. MRE, the smarter choice.
So here we are back again on Tall Tales, winding up the first half with one of our most famous callers, a guy who has called Tall Tales on a couple of occasions and showed me that I didn't know Jack. 0 on the script. Bob doesn't know what he's talking about. Jack was able to actually demonstrate that. So Jack took us back again to deportations and criminal sentencing. I got just a little bit more here on Canada versus the United States, and then I'll go to the next item on the card, which is Governor Calvo versus Hans Christian Andersen, and then CLTC versus Frank Uggan and Joe San Augustine. So I think where I left off is this Canadian named Bethridge said he has been contacted by people who thought they would be permitted under Customs and Border Patrol rules, Border Protection rules, but were instead barred due to their participation in Canada's existing medical marijuana system. It's illegal in the U.S., and theoretically that makes you a drug trafficker, he said. Several Canadians working in the cannabis industry interviewed for this story declined to comment, citing uncertainty and fear that speaking publicly could get them permanently banned by the Trump administration, which would affect their future career prospects and personal travel. It's very quickly become apparent that I have investors who are terrified, said April Pride, the founder of the cross-border women-focused cannabis firm Vander Pop. Mark Lustig, CEO of cross-border cannabis company Can Royalty, said his company is carefully monitoring the situation and making sure that everyone who does cross does it properly. So this takes us back to some of the things that I've been kind of harping about for quite some time, starting out with the proposition that as far as marijuana or cannabis is concerned, it's against the law to, against federal law to buy, sell, distribute, use, store, whatever, marijuana. And some of the states and territories have embarked on attempting to legalize those activities within their own borders. And I describe this as tying several loopholes together. And I got into a little bit yesterday on the subject of patenting marijuana. But if marijuana were to be recognized as a legal drug, and according to the research I did on that patent question, some of the compounds, the chemical compounds in marijuana, other than the mind-altering compound, actually have curative properties. So, but if marijuana were to be moved off of Schedule 1 and legalized, then instead of dealing with the DEA, you'd be dealing with the Food and Drug Administration. And I just don't see that, the mom and pop approach to that industry is going to be very fruitful. And I bring this article up as an example. Another thing that most people are not aware of is that if you are in the marijuana business and in a state where it's legal, when you fill out your federal income tax, you have to pay income tax on the revenue that you obtain from selling marijuana, just like any other kind of revenue, right? But since marijuana is illegal, according to federal law, you wouldn't be able to deduct your business expenses from the revenue that you obtain by selling marijuana. So you're going to be paying a lot of tax on that money that you make from selling marijuana. So I hear the clamor, there's so much local clamor. Well, the people approved it in a referendum. Why is it taking so long? And the reason it's taking so long is that, in a sentence, we continue to try to pound a round peg into a square hole. A square hole is the federal law, and the round peg we keep trying to drive is a law that doesn't fit in with our regulatory schemes in the United States. Certainly the United States has the bureaucracy set up to deal with drugs and recreational chemicals like tobacco and alcohol. But it's not set up to deal with marijuana, and that is a problem. And in a sense, because of that problem, some people are going to be able to make money off marijuana that wouldn't be able to make money off marijuana if it became legal. Because, as I mentioned, you get the FDA involved, and you're probably, if there will be the market that some people predict, big pharma and big tobacco are going to be jumping in there and attempting to make some of those profits also. My own personal take on it is that it ought to be moved off Schedule 1, and research ought to be permitted to see exactly what the medical properties of marijuana are. That being done, then we know how to deal with medicine in the United States. That's the Food and Drug Administration. As far as criminal law is concerned, I am a federalist. Federalist meaning someone who believes in the federal system, not what we have now. We have a national government now. But under the theory of federalism, we have 50 independent, quasi-independent states, subordinate sovereigns, who set the criminal laws that govern their people themselves within the boundaries of their own state, whether those criminal laws deal with abortion, alcohol, marijuana, you name it. So I think that the national government is overstepping its authority by regulating marijuana other than in interstate commerce. But one of the villains in my narrative, the U.S. Supreme Court in a 1943 case, Wickard versus Filburn, broadened the commerce clause so much that it takes a really great imagination to figure out what is not interstate commerce. And get your Law and Order notebooks out here. Wickard versus Filburn dealt with one of the New Deal acts called the Agricultural Adjustment Act, that controlled acreage that a farmer could plant, controlled the acreage of corn that he could plant. And if a farmer was given a certain allocation, and if he planted more corn than that, he was subject to a pretty stiff fine. Well, Mr. Wickard had his own hog farm, and all the corn he raised, he fed to his own hogs. And his defense was interstate commerce. Grazing corn to feed my own hogs as interstate commerce. There's no federal nexus here. But the Supreme Court said, well, you know, actually when he feeds that corn to his own hogs, he's not putting it on the market, on the interstate market. So therefore what he does is affecting commerce. So the national government can regulate that. So that's how we got to where we are. With stopping people at the border and quizzing them as to whether or not they are participants in the cannabis industry in Canada. And if they are, they can't come into the United States. So the punchline in my story here again is the Supreme Court is the villain in a lot of these scenarios because people figured out, and mostly liberals, folks on the left, New Dealers, figured out that 5 folks in black robes, if they want to, are not stuck with just interpreting the law. They can also make the law, and if they really set their minds to it, they can amend the U.S. Constitution. So I guess I should have prefaced that item on the card with the old saying, well, to make a short story long, because that's kind of what I did, but my bad. So we go on to the next item on the card, which is an article that appeared in the Post that I bill as Governor Calvo versus Hans Christian Andersen. And Hans Christian Andersen wrote fairy tales. He wasn't even on the Supreme Court, but he wrote fairy tales. And one of his more famous one is called The Emperor's New Clothes. Now, there's a glitch in this editorial, so I'm going to edit it as I read it to remove the glitch, and then when I've finished, I'll tell you what the glitch is. Danish author Hans Christian Andersen penned the short tale The Emperor's New Clothes about 2 weavers who sold an emperor a new suit of clothes which were invisible to anyone who was incompetent or stupid. In other words, the weaver said, you put these clothes on, and people who are incompetent or stupid aren't going to be able to see your new clothes. Everybody else, people that are not stupid, are going to be able to see it. So people that can't see these clothes are stupid. These swindlers trick the emperor into thinking his clothes were invisible because only stupid people could see them, right? But of course, they were not. No one dared say anything to the emperor for fear of appearing to be unfit for the job that he held. So if anybody said to the emperor, hey, emperor, you're running around downtown buck naked, you're kind of taking a risk. No one would do that because they were afraid that because of the sale here, that the government, that the king would think that the emperor would think they were stupid. So the phrase "emperor's new clothes" has entered the language as a way of saying that sometimes people who serve a leader are afraid to give him straight talk because they think that the leader will consider them unworthy or stupid. So this is by Raymond V. Paris, and he goes through the whole thing about the Governor Calvo wearing the uniform, right? That we talked about for a couple of days here. First there was a story, and there was some outrage about the governor parading literally around in an army uniform. Then the next day, the Adeloop for this village came out trying to fix it and only made it worse. And now Raymond Paris, who is a retired Army colonel, comes out and says that give the governor credit for having good intentions, and he probably thought he was doing something good, etc. And then he goes on to say, what is inexcusable is the weavers of his clothing failed to advise him properly in preventing the awkwardness, embarrassment, and eventual fallout in him parading that way in an official ceremony. The collective intellect of his advisors, military and civilian, failed him in not thinking strategically or critically about the common political picture of our island during the present election cycle. Senior leaders must discern the political implications as well as the appropriateness of the governor's appearance to not only the rank and file but to the general public. Failure to reflect on this simple matter resulted in the overshadowing, if not trivialization, of the true purpose of the ceremony, to render honor and respect. On that day, the Commander-in-Chief of the Guam National Guard deserved much better than the invisible clothes of the emperor. Nicely put. And something that you'll see from time to time where you have a boss, a leader, a governor, a senator, a general manager, or whatever, whose confidants cannot save him from himself because he is suffering from the paradigm of the emperor's new clothes. Everyone would be afraid to say, you shouldn't do that, boss, because if you did, here are the implications. Emperor's New Clothes by Raymond Paris. Nice letter to the editor. And I hope that winds up Governor Calvo in his soldier's uniform. So the next item on the calendar is CLTC versus Frank Uggan and Joe San Augustine. And then after that, I've got another pretty hot one, which is Edaquin. Maybe I should do that one first. Edaquin versus Iminagahit. And this one goes to Leon Guerrero, Leon Guerrero and Frank Uggan, and the verbal brickbats they've been tossing back and forth at one another. Frank has justified his running as a write-in, even though he'd signed a unity pledge, because he feels that the whole unity idea was broken when a group of anonymous smear advertisements or smear campaign pieces came out on social media. And Frank Uggan confronted In fact, right here on Ray's show, the Ray Gibson show, he said he had papers, he had documentation, metadata that showed that those anonymous smears came from Lulian Guerrero's campaign. Now, on the subject of metadata, a digital scholar, Bob Kelly, called yesterday and said that, well, you know, you can fake metadata too. But anyhow, the narrative was that Frank accused Lou of sabotaging his campaign with these anonymous smears, and he felt that that vitiated the unity pledge. And you know, if I were to carry a brief for Frank, I'd say, well, you know, you lost by 254 votes. How much of an impact did those anonymous smears have? Could they have had enough impact to carry 254 votes away from Frank? Maybe, maybe not. Of course, there's no way that we would ever know. So, and then Frank also said that he showed those to Lulian Guerrero, and Lulian Guerrero said she didn't have any knowledge of those, Frank's theory about the metadata, that her campaign, as far as she knew, had no role in the anonymous smears at all. And Frank called her a liar. He called her a liar 3 times. And that's how we get to this item on the show, Idaquin versus Imenagahid. So this also made a Post article, which I covered yesterday. And Frank said, she can deny it all he wants. I know for a fact it came from them. That's what he said on the point. So this was the subject of a pretty hot article in yesterday's Post. But that was not the end of the story. This morning, as is my usual custom, and if it's not yours, I would certainly urge you to start developing this habit. I pop up out of the sack in the morning, and I turn on the point at 93.3, and I listen to the Ray Gibson show. It's a great way to start your day. It's interesting. It's informative. Sometimes it leads to some really good show prep for me. That probably wouldn't be a reason that you might want. Well, maybe it would prepare you for your afternoon with tall tales. So as I listened to Ray this morning, 7th inning stretch already. Well, I'll come back to the Ray Gibson show right after the 7th inning stretch. We'll pick up Idaquin versus Imenagahid.
Docomo Pacific is making the Better Together bundle even better. 2 great services plus more. Get unlimited local calls, SMS, and 20 gigs of data, plus unlimited home internet for $109 a month. Sign up today and get free installation and choose between a free Galaxy S8, S8 Plus, or $100 off select devices. Mobile plus online from Docomo Pacific. Better together. Some conditions apply. See store for details.
must be a little dusty out there in the center field bleachers. Something made me sneeze. So checking out Facebook here, I've got Linda Gabriel and Margaret Bloss talking about Margaret's trip to Caledonia. There's a New Caledonia, is southeast of here, kind of north of Australia and New Zealand. And then one of the old names for Scotland is Caledonia. I don't know which one that Margaret went to, but man, if your spell check would take you there, I'd sure like to get that hold of that kind of spell check myself. It's a pretty cheap way to take a long trip like that, but I guess that isn't what you meant, Margaret. But anyhow, Margaret, Linda, glad you have you on board. And according to Carl, I'm moving again, so that's encouraging. I'm still not squared away with my laptop, so I'm missing a lot of the Facebook comments, unfortunately. Okay, so this morning then, as luck would have it on the Ray Gibson Show, which is, I'm saying, it's a great way to start your day if that's not how you're doing it. In fact, I've heard it said that Ray Gibson said that you could set your dial at 93.3 at 6 o'clock in the morning. Just leave it there all day and you can touch it again. But during Ray's show, Frank Uggan actually came into the studio and was apparently sitting right over here, right over here in the studio. And as Ray was interviewing him, I think Lou Leon Guerrero called in. Yeah, I don't think Ray called her. I think she called in. Yeah, so Lou Leon Guerrero calls in and Frank Uggan is there. And they chatted briefly. And they got back to the item on the card here. Who is Hadzi Mandagi? And Frank came back again, and then Lou called Frank a loser and that he should get over it. And then Lou explained that, as I remember it, Lou explained that she tried to get Frank on board with her since she had won the Democrat primary. And she said, you know, Frank, I told you I wanted you to, I wanted your help, and I told you that I would be able to find you a position in my administration. Wow. Yeah, and Frank just stuck with his same old storyline, about who was telling the truth, etc. But that's really interesting that, we talk about this every time there's an election and someone aligns with someone else and we say, well, I wonder what he got out of that, or I wonder what they offered her, or something like that. But I think this is the first time I've heard it on FM radio like I heard it this morning. And I can't help but wonder if other people are not saying, is that really what we're looking for in our government, that we make these deals to get someone's support, promise them a job after the election's over? So anyhow, we've got a couple of factors weighing in on the card here. Edakwan versus Imenagahit. Frank says that he's certain that the anonymous smears came from Lou. Lou says she has no knowledge of it. And Bob Kelly says, well, you can fake metadata just like you could fake other things online if you know how to do it. And then to cap it off, on the radio, Lou tells us that she had offered Frank a job to get him to come on board. So I will allow our international radio listening audience and all of our Facebookers to I will appoint each of those as judges. You know, in a boxing match, there are usually 3 judges, and the 3 judges decide, unless there's a knockout, the 3 judges decide who won the bout on points. So I don't think there was a knockout this morning. I suppose maybe the functional equivalent, because Lou said the same thing that she said about the abortion controversy. She said, you know, I'm not going to talk about that anymore. I've got other issues. And with respect to any kind of a forum, she's made it clear, like with the Chamber of Commerce, if Frank is going to be on the card, she's not coming. And so on the Ray Gibson show this morning, she just hung up, and she said to Ray as she hung up, "Call me." So with some, as far as talk radio goes, if they gave an Academy Award for good talk radio, I think this morning's the Ray Gibson show probably would have won, because it was really worth listening to. And once again, I don't miss it in the morning, and I don't hold myself out as being some sort of a literary critic always steering you around to those things that you might enjoy. But you can't go wrong with the Ray Gibson show, and this morning was certainly the proof of that. So that's Idakun versus Imenagahit. I move on from there to last night's, well, actually the continuing saga of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. And I did get to watch it after Tall Tales last night, and I saw some gentlemen come forward and saying, well, you know, we swapped in line and we did everything right, and now we got a letter saying that our lease was void. And, you know, it's pretty easy to empathize with these folks. If you went to the post office and said, how much does it cost to mail a letter to Chicago, and the answer was 47 cents, and you bought a 47-cent stamp and put it on the envelope, figuring that it's going to go to your mom in Chicago or whoever, and 10 days later, that stamp comes back to you for insufficient postage, you're going to say, how did this happen? I did exactly what the mailman told me to do. It's not my fault, and now my mom is not going to get my letter, and she's going to think that I'm not writing to her, and all kinds of bad things are happening. I did exactly what they told me to do. So I can kind of empathize with these guys. On the other hand, I didn't get to watch, I should have, I guess, recorded it, the afternoon hearing, but I've heard some squibs from it. And you remember, by way of background now, this whole Chamorro Land Trust thing came about because Frank Uggan was alerted to a new road going up the side of Barragata Hill by some residents who had drainage problems because of the building of the road. He investigated and found out that Michael Bora had cut a deal to build a road to some new Chamorro Land Trust properties. And when we started digging around as to who got those properties, some prominent people and some relatives of people that work in the land trust got those properties, and it had all of the aura of a scandal. And it was in the news for several days. Frank Uggan promptly introduced a bill that would have brought the whole matter to a conclusion. I've told you before how Tom Atta sabotaged that bill, and although he could get a bill on for public hearing the day after he got some papers from the Land Trust Commission, he never put Frank Uggan's bill on for public hearing. So the Chamorro Land Trust, in the face of this scandal that has befallen it, and that the director, Michael Bora, and the deputy director, David Camacho, the Chamorro Land Trust comes out with an announcement. We have investigated everything that happened, and there was no wrongdoing. Now, on this very program, I've read newspapers from newscasts showing just exactly the opposite. So if there was no wrongdoing there, maybe we could clone Hans Christian Andersen and get him to write this one up into a new fairy tale. The no wrongdoing is kind of like the emperor's new clothes. Only stupid people apparently can see the wrongdoing, but the intelligentsia at the Land Trust Commission could see no wrongdoing whatsoever. Nothing happened. And I suppose if they consulted with Tony LaMorena, they would put Michael Bora up for the MagPro Award for being the manager of the year. So when they come before, then their next move was to ask the legislature just do a bulk ratification of all of these leases that were faulty. And there were two different kinds of faulty leases. A couple thousand of them were faulty because the statute says that leases have to be approved by the commission, not the director. But the director had approved them, and in some cases even the deputy director had approved them. I suppose had they brought them around at a time when I was up there pestering Michael Bora for public documents, I could have signed some of those leases because it didn't seem like they were very particular who they allowed to sign the leases in the face of a statute that said that the leases had to be approved by the commission. So that's a couple thousand more of the leases, and then 102 of the leases were void, according to the Attorney General, because they were awarded to people who had skipped in the line. So the way that worked was that the line opened in 1995, and it lasted for 3 days. One guy who testified last night, who testified actually in favor of the bill, but really kind of put a human face on the whole thing. He said he wanted a piece of land so bad that he came down and stood in line for 3 days. And he said in order to do that, he had to quit his job. Or maybe he got fired. I don't know which. But it cost him his job to stand in that line for 3 days. So there were a lot of hardships for people who stood in that line. And we know now that a lot of those people who stood in line were able to assign their place in line to somebody else. And we also know that there are a couple of thousand people that still haven't gotten any Chamorro Land Trust land. You can only imagine how they must feel about the land trust accommodating people with these luxury lots on Mount Barragata, one of which is appraised at $700,000, one at $400,000. How these folks that never got a piece of land must feel, or those that had to provide their own roads and infrastructure. So at the hearing last night, the media spotlight centered on DLM and CLTC early this year after it was discovered that several government officials, including DLM staff or their family members, were handed leases in the sought-after properties. The commission stated that staffers and officials were following CLTC policies at the time. And then here's a quote from Senator Frank Uggan. How can that statement be released to the public, knowing full well that the director was responsible for overseeing this program, and then we recognize that the laws were not being followed? My question is, has there been any discipline? CLTC chairwoman Pika Farran said a commission review found the law was not followed. Now, earlier they said nobody did anything wrong. So I guess in that world, it's possible not to follow the law, but at the same time not doing anything wrong. Now, I guess I ought to sit down with Ms. Feyerand and figure out how that's done, because if possible, I could probably get a job on the faculty of the law school at Harvard, even though I don't have any more Native American blood than anybody else does. But if I were, as a lawyer, if I could show clients how to not follow the law but not do anything wrong at the same time, that would be a pretty fancy piece of legal legerdemain, wouldn't it? Feyerand said a commission review found that the law was not followed, but tracking the issue back to the land trust origins would show that as they are today and as they were back then, the law was not implementable. How would she know? Because he never tried. You know, this is hard, so instead of following the law, we'll just not do it, and we'll say we didn't do anything wrong, and then if anybody calls us on it, we'll say, well, you know, the law wasn't implementable. Now, this is the same Land Trust Commission that never promulgated rules and regulations, even though it was certainly, I think, anybody who was paying attention after April knew that they had the ability to do that, but they never did, and they still haven't. The Commission administration over 23 years adopted practices and policies that allowed leasing to continue. And I'm going to add a couple words there to friends and relatives and employees. You remember Michael Bora signed one lease in two places, once as the director and once as the lessee. Today, we're saying we realize it's broken. This bill we're talking about today would ratify the leases. Oh. Prior to appearing for the public hearing, the Commission was in the process of finalizing several amendments to CLTC law that it hoped to forward for legislative consideration. Then back to Frank Uggan. But with the same staff, the same leadership, training, and then moving forward, when there were direct contributors to this program not being properly implemented in the last 23 years, Uggan said. The Barragata Heights leases were included among ratified and voided leases submitted to the legislature. Feyerand said the Commission could not cherry pick the Barragata Heights leases. Now, these are the new leases, and they are probably as the most egregious of all. But Joe San Augustine said he believed the Barragata Heights leases should have been resolved separately. There's no building yet. There's no money there, he said. Why couldn't the Commission go in there and say for the Barragata Heights, you're null and void. Let's go over this one more time because you've determined the law was not being complied with. So that's why I call this Frank Uggan and Joe San Augustine versus the Chamorro Land Trust Commission. The real Joe is softly playing Dave Brubeck's Take 5 in the background, so I got to take a short break, and then we'll be powering down the home stretch. I think probably it's going to take the rest of the program to finish this up.
Here at APL, our core values give the company its heart and soul. Whether it's connecting your business with our global network through our newly enhanced service or investing our efforts into giving back to the community, APL is committed to serving you. We humbly honor the opportunity to find innovative solutions for you and your business. To learn more about our enhanced service, call 588-4651 or visit www.apl.com/Guam for more details.
So here we are heading down the home stretch, and I notice that our Carl is in the process of calling in, and he's probably going to use that phone call to magnify his latest post, in which he says, I imagine you wouldn't have given Uggan such a warm welcome. Ray was kind. I think your curmudgeonly nature would not have made kindness a possibility. Well, you know, I got to get me a badge that says curmudgeon on it, because I would wear my curmudgeonness, if there is such a word, like a badge, right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, like remember that time I sent you out to find the lyrics for Dave Brubeck's Take Five?
Yes, I do.
And what did you find out?
That it's an instrumental.
And there were no lyrics.
There is no lyrics.
Yeah. And you didn't want to come back and tell me that, because you felt like it's kind of like telling the emperor he had no clothes, right?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, so what do you got for me this afternoon, Carl?
On the matter of curmudgeons, you know, the libertarian Charles Murray, you've probably heard of him.
Uh-huh.
He's written a lot of books, and he's got a very successful speaking career. And he's just a really intelligent guy. But he wrote a book that I have. I haven't read all of it. I probably read like a tenth of it. But it's really got some great advice. It's a small book, and it's called The Curmudgeon's Guide to Getting Ahead.
Mm.
And it's really excellent. It's a slim book. It doesn't take long to read, but I've read about maybe 3 chapters out of it, and one of them really is just an amazing chapter. But anyway, that's beside the point. Since we were on about curmudgeons, I wanted to call in because of some frustration I'm facing. I'm coming to this election, and I'm finding it the hardest election I've ever faced. I was, considering Lou, but then I started finding out things of her strong ties to the movement to end the present relationship with the United States, the anti-build-up stance, the abortion issue, other issues. Ray, I've been disappointed because of the Glock Party issue and the, Andre Bynum's famous pay raise smash and grab issue, which he has his fingerprints on that. And I've got issues with Frank also, with his stance on the military build-up, and he's seemed to be giving in to the faction that is anti-military and anti-build-up, and that was very disappointing. And in addition to the fact that he did sign the agreement and seems to be going against it, so I'm kind of throwing up my hands here and wondering, wow, who am I going to support in this thing? And that's just the gubernatorial race. That's not even counting the senatorial race and some frustrations I'm facing there. So I'm just tossing that into the conversational pot, and I don't know what your comments are, but this is the most frustrated I've ever been in an upcoming election. I don't know what to do.
Well, I hear what you're saying, Carl, and one of the differences between this election and some of the other elections that you've participated in, that because of the way we do business now, you can learn an awful lot more about a candidate. Candidates were able to, say 20, 30 years ago, were kind of able to conceal what they were really about without much trouble. But given talk radio, for one thing, and some of the other things that we have going for us now, it's a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, that could be maybe that's the root of my problem, is that I'm finding out more things than I would have ordinarily found out about in the past. And maybe if we had avenues like talk radio and, Facebook and other things where people can freely exchange ideas and thoughts and comments and did you know this, did you know that, maybe I would have been just as frustrated in the past, So that's a very good point. I really didn't think about that.
Well, nobody ever said that democracy was the easiest form of government. If we were living in probably most of the countries of the world, we wouldn't have to worry about such things. If we were living in China or Russia or a lot of other countries, this would not be on our list of things to be concerned about, would it?
No, that's very true. It's usually very tidy. You know, the government pretty much picks who they want to back, and anyone else is kind of just window dressing, you know, put there to provide the appearance that there's really some competition, but there really is no competition.
Right. Well, we'll get through it, Carl, and I will continue to do my job here on Tall Tales. That would be to be your afternoon curmudgeon, and kind of call them as I see them, without a whole lot of sugar coating, if that would sit well with our international radio listening audience.
Yes, I'll continue to listen in, and I'm sure that, you know, what you share and what some of your callers share and commenters on Facebook share will help to kind of de-muddy the water and help to make some sense of this and help to make the best decision in kind of a difficult race. But anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate always your insights and thoughts. I every time I have a chance, I listen in. I catch maybe 70% of your shows, and I'm never disappointed.
Okay, Carl, it's good talking to you. So we're just about there at the end of the program. I did have a couple of things I wanted to add about the CLTC. In the resolution that the CLTC sent to Senator Uggan, they said that, if people amongst the 102 who had built on their property were removed from their property because their leases are void, it would cost, they would have to be reimbursed for the value of their improvements. And I heard a figure last night kicked around of millions of dollars. And Tom Atta has been propagating this misapprehension also, because if a person has, if one of those people with a voidable or void lease is removed from his property, the government has no obligation to reimburse him for the improvements he put on the land. That may strike you as really harsh, but it is the law. And the law is that one who puts an improvement on real property, it's called a fixture, and the fixture becomes part of the real property. So that if you build a house if you're renting a house from Simon Legree, and you build it on Blackacre, and Simon Legree says, well, I'm not going to renew your lease, you got to move. You can't knock down the house and take it with you. The house has become part of the land. And there's nothing in the Chamorro Land Trust statute that would require that reimbursement. I read the law yesterday, Section 75110, that talks in terms of a person violating a lease. And in that case, it's very clear that the commission may take possession of the tract and the improvements thereon. One other really interesting thing came out of last night's hearing, and that's one of the people who came down in favor of the bill said that the commission ought to get off its, and go out and look at these leaseholds, because a lot of the leaseholds are not being occupied by the lessee. They're letting other people live on the leasehold. So that would be the kind of inquiry that the commission ought to be going into, instead of asking for a blanket approval of the leases. They ought to determine who's actually living on that leasehold. Otherwise, what they're doing is just enabling people who scammed the land trust. So I suppose we'll be talking about this on Monday. It's going to be a tough weekend for me. No Tall Tales for 2 whole days. I know I'll survive, but I'm really looking forward to getting back here on Tall Tales on Monday. So, and I know the Real Joe Cruz feels the same way, right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
All right, so adios, hasta lunes night.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Sailors hurt in chopper crash.